Hi, everyone. I'm Lorraine Driscoll, and this is another episode of Building Better Brains. So it's going to be a little bit different today. What we're doing is I'm going to be interviewing Sarah Jean Stewart, and she is a homeschooler, an experienced homeschooler of many years. And I know that many parents are kind of pulling their hair out. I've even seen posts that absolutely breaks my heart where parents are losing sleep over if their kid's going to lose their year or lose out on education, as well as how they're going to manage homeschooling and where to start and so forth. So I'm going to be doing a few interviews this week. Actually, I've actually had a few people all of a sudden volunteer, and Sarah is our first guest. So Sarah, if we want to kind of just get right into it, if you want to kind of tell me what made you decide to homeschool instead of send your child to public school?
Well, there are lots of great reasons for homeschooling, and I think everybody has their own reasons. For me, it was mostly about efficiency, honestly. There's just so much wasted time in school. I went to school, I had a great time, I did well, but I also spent a lot of time sitting and waiting for everyone else to be done and finding ways to fill my time. I spent one whole year where I read an entire novel during class every single day. I learned to just ask to go to another room and practice violin or volunteer to decorate bulletin boards. I found ways to fill the time, but I could have been using that time a lot more efficiently. So for me, that was my main reason for homeschooling, is that it's just a lot more efficient. But there are lots of other great reasons too. There are plenty of benefits to homeschooling, but that was really what drove me to it to begin with.
Okay, awesome, cool. What did you wish that if you kind of could go back to the past, what do you wish you had known then that you know now, whenever you're getting started?
I think what I would tell people getting started is that there are a lot more ways to learn than just sitting in front of a workbook or in front of your computer. Now, those are certainly valid ways to learn, and they're good skills to have. You want to be able to sit in front of a math worksheet and do it and know that you can do that. But really, the experiential learning is what your kids are going to retain. So I certainly, I'm sure my teacher at some point in school told us about pioneer times and stood up there and did a lecture and told us about churning butter and what that looked like. But I don't remember that. I remember when we went to the farm museum and sat down with the museum interpreter and churned butter. So getting out there and actually doing things, I think, is how you're going to learn. I think of, we're doing a wildlife garden this spring. So you have science in there because you're learning about all the animals that you're building your garden for. You're doing math because you're doing measurements of things. When you're planting, you're going to have English because we're going to certify our wildlife garden. So you have forms that you fill out and mail in. And then of course, you have art and all your like minor things that you're learning along the way too. And you're more likely to actually remember those things you did because it was an experience. But I mean, there are a million examples that I could use, but my I wish I knew this to begin with would probably be, there's a lot more value in all of those, everyday learning experiences than you might think.
Right. And that is what I am hearing from a lot of homeschoolers, is the biggest mistake that people make whenever they're either kind of forced homeschooling because maybe a child is sick, or maybe a situation like this, that they think that the homeschooling needs to look like school. And that, I mean, we know even as teachers, right, myself being a certified teacher and teaching full-time for over a decade, that the big thing that was always driven home is it needs to be relevant for kids to actually retain it.
Yeah.
And it's better if it's hands-on.
Mm-hmm. Keep in mind too, with the, it has to look like school thing. A lot of people think because their kids are at school for 6 or 7 hours that they're doing 6 or 7 hours of learning. That's not true. Don't try to sit your kids in front of a workbook or in front of their computer for 6 hours. You'll both go crazy. That's not going to work. I promise you.
Yeah. That's right. And that is something that I see too. I see a meme going around actually on Facebook, where it says, I wonder how long it's going to take the new homeschooling parents to realize that you can do in about 2 to 3 hours what you do in like 6 hours at school.
Oh yeah. And that's only in the older grades. Like the younger grades, they've actually done studies where it's like 45 minutes to an hour and 15 minutes of actual learning
Right.
Up to grade 3 or 4, I think it is. I can't remember, but I mean, I'll link to that later. I'll find the study, but it's kind of insane. Like, people don't realize how much time is used doing other things aside from learning.
That's
Even
right.
if you just take into account, doing roll call and handing out worksheets and changing classes, and even that takes up a lot of time.
Yeah, exactly. Or like phys ed, which myself, I always hated phys ed because I'm not a territorial sports person, and most of phys ed is consumed of that. And it's not to say it's, my understanding, and I know any of the homeschoolers I know, their kids are way more physically active. And they might be doing territorial sports if that's their thing, but they might be doing all kinds of other fitness.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's so cool because I feel like I know there's so many adults like myself who just like have trauma from those sports, because the minute they say, well, I'm not athletic, and it's like, well, you're not maybe going to play, not really interested in playing soccer or hockey because you're not.
There's so many other things. Yeah.
My daughter is like that. She doesn't want to get gentle and sweet and sensitive, but we go for walks, we go biking. She loves to swim. She loves to race, climb trees. And so, yeah, like you said, I think it's really important that parents realize they do not need to be spending 6 hours a day homeschooling to get the benefit, if you will, of school. And I think that's important too, what you said, like even just roll call. And in today's classrooms that are so crazy for so many kids, there's so much time loss. I remember teaching classes that were just absolutely bananas. And I remember thinking, my God, I taught for about 20 minutes. Like the rest of the time was just managing behaviors, dealing with issues, getting the class back on track, and so forth. So I do think that, if parents kind of keep that perspective, that hopefully that'll, relieve some of their anxieties. So. And
honestly, right now, I'm sure this will change now that they've closed schools for longer in Ontario. But right now, for the younger grades, the ministry their recommendations are use this math website and go watch TVO Kids. Like, really, they're clearly not that concerned either. So go do fun things with your children, bake, play board games, do art projects. You're going to learn when you're doing those things.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think, like you said, and that's been really my experience, and something I had to unlearn, is that learning actually takes place best when it's not out of a book. I mean, there's valid learning that comes through books, but that's not how we evolved, right? We learned as humans how to do amazing things. We built cities, we've done all kinds of stuff, and most of it happened through hands-on experiences.
Of course, yeah.
And it's only in the last little over 100 years that all of a sudden we've just associated learning with a textbook and answering questions or something of the sort. So yeah, really important kind of mindset shift there.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so what tips would you give parents who are kind of starting out, where to start, whether it's resources or anything that you can kind of think of?
There are so many resources out there, and there already were. And now, because all of the public school children are also off, there's a plethora of places offering free resources that didn't exist before as well. So I've started compiling a list. I'll share that later on your page, I guess. But really, I mean, pretty much anything you can think of, there's a resource out there for that.
Right.
And if people want to come to me later and ask for resources for specific subject areas, there are tons and tons and tons. I find, like, we don't use it right now, but Khan Academy is fantastic. It's a great place to, have a few subjects in one spot and be able to keep track. And it's free. So if you're really looking to do some coursework while you're off and keep track of it, Khan Academy is a good one. I like things that track progress so that I don't have to do it. So we use IXL for math, and then for supplementary English, and that's why I like it. I mean, that costs money. But if you're out for the year, maybe you want to invest. But what I like about that is the analytics. It tracks everything. I know exactly what the kids are doing. I know how much time they've spent on each question. So for me, that's valuable, but other people might not care at all. But my advice, though, while this is going on, you may never need it, but keep records too. I would say that would be good advice for any homeschooler, because you never know what's going to happen. just keep a record of your learning, even if it is baking, that you're still learning math and science. Talk about the things that you're learning while you're doing it. And we sort of do that everywhere we go and in everything we do. One of the nice things that I can point to is those lovely schedules that everyone's making online. And that might actually work for some people. Like, honestly, for me to get things done, I make a checklist for the day, and the days that I do that are my most productive days. But I'm going to tell people, don't feel like you have to stick to something like that, because it's possibly unattainable at the best of times, especially when you're transitioning from being in school all day to not. But even so, like at this time, it's really especially unattainable because people are in high stress situations, and really unnecessary too. I mean, if you're going to keep a schedule, make sure you also are keeping some flexibility in mind. Like you really want to make sure that you're not destroying your relationship with your kids for the sake of keeping a schedule, because I don't think there's enough value in that to have that trade-off. So my advice would be to maintain as much flexibility as possible, because you're going to learn no matter what. Like, I think this is an excellent opportunity for people to see that their kids are going to learn things no matter what they do.
Yeah, I really agree that there's a lot of opportunities, as much as there's, some major stressors surrounding all kinds of stuff, and even stressors surrounding education. I think this can be an amazing opportunity for parents to see the potential of what other types of real world learning can offer. Yeah, definitely.
And things that you'd regularly do for fun anyways. Like, as you can see, we have like a billion board games behind me. I have, we have, it just goes on forever. We have like 900 board games. But you can actually get like a game schooling log. So it's a sheet where you write down what games you've played, and then you can align it to what subject areas you're actually learning at the time. Wow. So we have games that are like specifically learning games. This is a game to learn math, and that's what it is. But then we have other games where you're just sneakily learning multiplication and practicing that all the time. Or, remember the old Choose Your Own Adventure books?
Yes.
They have board games now. So as we go around, like each time we choose a new card, one of the kids reads it out, or, we take our turns too. But that's a considerable chunk of text that even the 7-year-old is taking her turn reading. So, there are other ways to get in those things, like, reading aloud and practicing your math facts that are not traditional ways.
Yeah. Yeah, that's, and to go back a little bit to the schedule thing, actually, no, I'm not going to, because I know we're going to be getting into that in a second. So, yeah, I feel like we've kind of already touched on the benefits of homeschooling and so forth. So what is your tip? Because I think this is something that a lot of parents are struggling with at this point, is they're already aware, many of them, that there's like homework battles, right? They're like, I can't even get my kid to read for 20 minutes, and I'm struggling with motivation to get them to do their homework. How am I going to get them to like cooperate for homeschooling? Because we do know to some extent that sometimes, and I think there's reasons for this, but we often hear sometimes that kids will listen better to a stranger than the parent.
Yeah, definitely.
Give your parent a harder time. So what are your tips on how to avoid that, how to keep children motivated, and so forth?
This actually comes up a lot. I coach a lot of new homeschoolers through getting started. Right. And that's usually the main concern is, but my kids don't listen to me, so how am I going to make them do homework? It's, it's bad enough doing homework for an hour a night. How am I going to make them do their work all day? Right. And I actually think the best advice for that is to let your kids take the lead. So figure out what they're interested in learning, and sort of craft your curriculum around that. Especially as homeschoolers, you have so much freedom. We have access to the Ontario curriculum. Right. And you can use it. You don't have to, but even if you want to, I mean, you're crafting how you follow that however you want, right? So if your kid wants to learn about wolves, great, go learn about wolves. You have all of the resources available. We have the internet. We can learn about anything at any time. We're very lucky. So my advice would be, children are more motivated when they're interested in what they're doing. So not only have them choose the subject, but even help them craft their own assignments and assessments. There's nothing wrong with doing that, and they'll be a lot more motivated. Try to link it to real life in some way, whether it's their interests or just, you know, actual hands-on experiences, and you're a lot more likely to get rid of that resistance.
Right. And would you say, now I know this might be a bit different for you because you started off with your children right from the beginning, but even just based on knowing other homeschoolers, would you say that parents have more difficulty with that in the beginning? And that's kind of the part of the learning curve, is figuring out how to get their kids to, you know, cooperate and stay motivated and so forth. And that after a time that kind of, if you kind of stick with it and keep at it, that they kind of settle in and get it. So yeah,
well, I think one thing that a lot of the new forced homeschoolers are not going to realize even exists is that period of what we call deschooling. Right. So transitioning from school to homeschooling is a huge thing. And right. I almost wouldn't even recommend that if you're going to follow the curriculum and do bookwork every day and do your online work or whatever. I almost wouldn't even recommend just doing that right away unless you have a really keen child who listens really well and right. is very, you know, mentally well and it's not going to affect them negatively. Because that deschooling period is actually pretty important. Just, you know, being at home, being able to choose what you're doing. Maybe start slowly if you want to do bookwork and stuff, you know, do 1 page of math, 1 page of English, and then do other things. So I think that having that flexibility, again, especially now when it's a little bit different, maybe if you're choosing to homeschool, but there are so many people who are, as of today, welcome to homeschooling. And now you're here for a couple of months at least. And I think there's a pretty good chance that we're going to be here until the end of the year. Right. So that's, you know, that's very sudden and a long time for people who weren't planning on it. Right. And lean on the community too. Like there is a huge homeschool community already. Yeah. And I know, you know, there are probably people from all over watching, but I know there's a Cornwall homeschoolers group. There are several Ottawa homeschoolers groups, some of which I help admin. And we're even like bypassing some of the like, do you homeschool questions now? And yes, just everybody come on in because now y'all kind of homeschool. But, you know, lean on the community because there are a lot of people out there willing to help and a lot of resources available. I'm going to start posting resources regularly for people. And I always tell people, if you have questions, just reach out, and even more so now.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think that the deschooling thing is really interesting. And I think, like you said, it depends if you have a child who's willing. Like one thing that I kind of wondered, and I kind of actually tried with my daughter a little bit this morning. We've been actually working on math for a while anyways. She's in public school, but so my thing was, and I don't know if this is the right approach for everyone, but I feel like it is for our family, where it's been a really lazy week. And I said to my husband, I don't really want her, if school is out till September, which we don't know, but let's say hypothetically it is, I don't want her in pajamas all day for the rest of the year. So, and it's not that I'm really uptight about pajamas in particular or whatever, but I feel like we want to have some kind of routine and so forth. Otherwise, I feel like that could just be, I don't know, create some bad habits and so forth. So I said to her, you know, we'll get dressed this morning and get into our some kind of semblance of a routine again. And I said, let's do a little bit of math first thing in the morning. You know, she loves to write, so she's kind of going to do that on her own. And then the rest of the day is to yourself. Yeah. And would you think that that sounded like wisdom for families to kind of create some kind of structure?
I mean, that's what we do, but I'm not saying that that's going to work for everyone, especially in you are thrust into this situation. And I'm not saying that there's not a benefit in having structure, but I think that the benefit of maintaining a relationship with your children probably outweighs that at this point. But for my kids, like, we can go anywhere and they're prepared to do school. So they know that they have a certain set of things that they have to do every day. So they do math, English, and for English, they do their IXL, they do reading, and they do something that they're writing. So they have their math, their reading, their writing, and their grammar, essentially, which is what IXL covers. And then they have to do French and piano. And those are the things they absolutely have to do every day.
Okay. Well,
and cool. If I am not there, even like everyone's like, when I was at the hospital, or if we're traveling, or if I sleep in for an hour, like sometimes I'll sleep in, the kids don't come and wake me, and I'll get up at 8 o'clock and someone has been up since 6:30 and they're done half their school. So like they know what they have to do, and they're motivated to get it done because then they can do other things that they want to do.
Right. And that's kind of what was my thinking with my daughter, is I definitely don't want her, because she's weaker in math. I wouldn't say super weak, but I don't want her to not have any math between now and September.
Yes.
So I knew that the perfect way to do this was, she finds that there's way too much sitting in school. She's a super creative girl. And I said, look, all you have to do is a little bit of math in the morning and a little bit of this, and then you have the rest of the day to herself. So she thinks it's great, and just like she's out there working right now, just wants to get it over with, right?
That's awesome.
So she can play. So yeah. I think that the carrot probably can kind of help with motivation too, right?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And I think we're planning on, I mean, socializing in general is going to be difficult at this time. We're planning on getting together with friends online as well to do things together, sort of like we're doing here. Yeah. And so I think that'll be interesting too, to like sort of leverage that as a, get your schoolwork done, and then we can play with friends.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. So what advice would you give? Because one thing I'm seeing a lot of, and I really feel for these parents, some of us are fortunate enough to not be essential employees, if you will, and so forth. But there's a lot of people right now where one or both parents are essential employees. So what advice would you give, or strategies would you give to those parents who are working full time and concerned that their child is going to really miss out?
I think using those online programs that have a tracking system is probably a good idea in those cases. A lot of them also have built-in reward systems too, so it tries to, motivate children. Right. They have their little badge systems, or it's gamified in some way, right? So that can be a valuable thing. I find making lists to be very helpful for my kids. My kids really like checklists. These are the things you have to do, check it off. Yeah. But again, this might be the time to just say children are going to learn anyways, and have them, let them know that between these hours, whatever you're doing has to be teaching you something. Yeah. And have them write down what they're learning from it. Like, you might be surprised what your kid's learning when they're playing Minecraft, for example, right? Yeah. Like, I let my kids download it as like an extra thing that they could do in their free time. Right. And I kind of thought they were basically doing nothing. Right. Until they came and showed me their giant houses that they'd built. And even while we're walking through the house, they're like, oh, there's a leak there. Okay, let me think, how do I fix that? And they're like thinking about the different materials that they'd have to use to make that work. And you're actually like doing a fair amount of learning when you're doing stuff like that. Oh, so it's it might be interesting to just, let them take the lead and let you know what they're learning. Right. And if you see gaps, then find a way to fill them and say, hey, so today we're going to do this. Yeah. But again, especially for elementary age children, their guidelines right now from the ministry are play this math game online and watch TVO. So really anything you're doing is probably good for now.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, that's great. Okay. So we touched a little bit on real life skills, and that is something that I find is super cool about homeschooling. Because I do work with a lot of homeschooling parents, and I'm always amazed at what kids and parents have the time to do in a homeschooling situation that you do not get in a regular
definitely
run school system, if you will. And I think it's just really important and super cool, because even like when I was in grade 7 and 8, we used to get bused to the local kind of central school, and we would do home ec and shop, and kids don't even get that anymore.
Yeah.
And how many times do you see those memes and so forth going around Facebook about they should teach kids this now, and they should teach kids gardening, they should teach kids finances. And I'm seeing that homeschoolers have no problems with this stuff. Yeah. So what real life skills or alternative learning to homeschool kids really get to benefit from?
That's part of that efficiency, right? We have more time to do those things. Yeah. So I think that varies by family, of course. And the answer is anything you want. Like for for years, we've been learning herbal studies with a local herbalist, like since the girls were tiny. So we go out and learn about wild, edible, and medicinal plants all around Ottawa. And definitely at like 4 years old, each of my children knew more plants and could identify more plants and their uses than I knew when I was in my early 20s. Right. So, you know, and that's going to be really useful in the apocalypse.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Our whole yard is salad. We don't have to worry about groceries. Right. But no, really, I mean, you have the opportunities to choose the things that you want to learn,
right,
and then build whatever skills you want. But in terms of real life skills, I think it's funny that you know, most people their concern about homeschooling is socialization. And to be fair, right now, when we're not allowed to actually see anyone, that might be an issue. But I do tell people that socialization in homeschooling is actually our biggest problem. We really have to make sure not to socialize too much.
Right.
Because honestly, there's such a huge homeschool community that we could be doing something fun with our friends every morning, afternoon, and evening. So we have to actually make an effort to do our schoolwork. But I think in terms of how we're socializing, it's actually a more real life model of socialization, because where else in your life are you ever going to be put with only children of your exact age, you know, from the same zip code practically. So in many cases, the same socioeconomic status, depending on the school, even maybe the same religion. So like, it's a really strange way to socialize. And aside from that, how many times have you heard a teacher say, "You're not here to socialize, stop talking"? So, but with homeschool kids, you're out in the community, you're socializing with people of all ages. Like my children certainly have a conversation with adults just as easily as they have a conversation with the 2-year-old up the road and everybody in between. I like to use my kids' birthday parties as an example, because we have they have, you know, 30 kids at their party from, you know, 2 years old up to 15 years old, all of whom consider themselves their friends, right? Yeah. So it's I think it's actually a more real life model of socialization. So while the concern for homeschoolers is that they're not socializing, I actually feel like on the whole, you're actually socializing in a more real life way that's going to be sort of consistent with the rest of your life rather than in this weird little bubble.
Yeah, and that is actually like, it's funny because I was interviewing we won't even go there. The interview didn't actually record anyway. I was interviewing a mom from Virginia who's head of like the homeschooling association or whatever there. And that's exactly what she was talking about, is that it's very weird if you give it some thought, how bizarre it is that we consider socialization all with kids with the same age. And I saw, it was a meme, and maybe you've seen it because you're part of homeschooling groups, but I thought it was hilarious. And it was kind of an eye-opener for me, where the child was homeschooled and was out of the grocery store, and another adult said, "Why aren't you at school?" And the child said, "I'm homeschooled." And then the adult said, "Well, how do you socialize?" And the kid said, "I'm talking to you right now."
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's what this mom said too, is the same thing, that, you know, the myth with homeschooling is that we're at home and nobody's leaving home and nobody's socializing with any other kids in the neighborhood or whatever, the community. And she said, the biggest struggle that homeschoolers are struggling with right now since this, you know, pandemic is that they can't socialize.
Exactly. Yeah.
At home, and their learning and resources are limited. So, and I think that's really, really important, because I was just talking to, a few months ago, a young girl who started her first kind of real job, and she's 19, and she said, I just find it so weird that I'm like friends with like a 40-year-old.
Yeah.
And I said, why? And I said, yeah, I know what you mean, because I obviously went through the regular government school system. And I remember having that feeling as well, that it felt like you're only supposed to hang out or associate with people and find commonalities with people who are your own age. And that was a real eye-opener for me, you know, to just have that perspective that why do we feel like we can't socialize with someone younger or someone older and so forth whenever we're in school? And
it's weird.
It's discouraged, right? It's discouraged because we actually, in the school systems, discourage the older kids from associating with younger kids. And sometimes understand the reasons, because sometimes there's some not so good motives from some of the older kids in terms of why they're socializing, which I won't get into, but it is really weird in terms of how we kids are made fun of, right? Like I remember I once, whenever I was a kid, would play with this girl who was 2 years younger than me. And we figured out that we could only do this in the neighborhood and not during school hours because people would make fun of us for hanging out with each other. Like, it was so ridiculous. So I absolutely love that part of homeschooling. So
it's definitely one of my favorite aspects of homeschooling, that there really are no boundaries in who you can be friends with.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, we just do not give social skills the credit that it deserves in terms of, you know, you can have the degree and the this and that, but we all know people who are really intelligent academically, you know, have the degree or have the diploma or whatever it is, but they don't have the social skills to either get the job or maintain the job.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's really, really as much, to me, as important to education as any other aspect. So.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Are there any other myths that you want to dispel about homeschooling, that things that just kind of that drive you crazy or whatever?
Yeah, I think that's the big one. I also with homeschooling, there's such a spectrum too. You have like your school at home people who have a schedule and we do this subject at this time and this subject at this time. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have unschooling, which is essentially, you know, we're not going to specifically teach any curriculum. Kids will learn what they'll learn when they want to learn it,
right.
And everything in between. And I think it's important to point out that all of those can be valid.
Right.
And really, it's whatever works for your family. Because I run a lot of activities and I'm very active in the homeschool community, I know families who do both of those and everything in between. And I think all of their children are learning and they're all progressing and they're all having a good time doing what they're doing. So really, at this point, you know, especially for the short-term homeschoolers where you're only here with us probably until the end of the year, just do whatever works for your family. Yeah. Your children will learn things. Yeah. And in many cases, they'll probably learn more than they would have learned in school in the same period of time. Right?
Yeah, I know, right?
So don't worry too much about keeping to a specific schedule or making things look exactly like school. That's not going to benefit you in the long run. Here, I'll take the baby. Yeah. That's not going to benefit you in the long run.
Right.
Right now, I think the most important thing is to focus on making sure that you're having a good relationship with your children. I mean, how many times are you ever going to have the chance, if you're someone who normally works, when are you going to have the chance to stay at home with your children for months, right? Like, this is new. So let it be a good thing for your family. Yeah. You don't want your kids to look back on this and remember it as, you know, a stressful and traumatic time. You can instead have your kids looking back on this as that really cool, fun time they had during the pandemic. So,
right. Yeah. I think that's so important. That our biggest thing right now, before anything else, needs to be teaching our children emotional resilience.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Is there anything else at this point that you want to add in? Tips, suggestions? We're kind of coming to an end, but anything else you want parents to know or that you want to say?
Yeah, I'll share a whole bunch of resources throughout the day to your page, I think, if you have people watching for resources, because there are so many things out there that I couldn't possibly even begin to list them all here. And I even have like a bunch of Pinterest boards for ideas for, like, you know, things like a wildlife garden or art projects and things like that, because, you know, I homeschool and Pinterest is my god. Yeah. So I'll share some of those as well. And of course, if anyone has any specific questions, they're always free to reach out and ask, and can point you in the right direction. And I'm sure there are lots of other homeschoolers who are happy to share too.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I'm going to be typing up a blog just about some of the overview of different homeschoolers I've talked to in the last week and a half. So if you want to send me some stuff, then we can, I can put that on for everyone to, those resources too. So that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Sarah. I so appreciate your time. And I think you've really offered some really insightful information and tips on why you don't need to have a nervous breakdown trying to homeschool, that if anything, it can be less stressful for you and the kids, right? So yeah. Definitely.
Oh, and definitely my last tip is don't be afraid to put yourself in timeout. If things feel overwhelming, it's okay to just walk away and go, nope, I'm going in here for 5 minutes.
Right. So that's so good.
especially as you start out and the dynamic is shifting. You know, you get on to D7 of quarantine with your children. You just take a break. It's fine. Like everything will be there when you get back.
Yeah, because these are not normal times, right? Like this is not normal, even normal homeschooling, as I've learned that most people homeschooling are in homeschooling co-ops and connecting with other people, and they're doing shared teaching and shared learning. And so yeah, do not feel like, you know, we have to acknowledge that this is unprecedented times and we need to just do the best we can. So
we are going to try to do some of that shared learning still online. And I've been talking to the kids. They're with their dad right now for March break. I've been talking to the girls, you know, brainstorming ways that we can still socialize with our homeschool friends. And now that includes all of our new homeschool friends. They're excited to, you know, virtually meet new people because of this too. So, you know, keep watch for that. I think we're thinking about doing like a virtual science fair and hosting some game nights digitally and that sort of thing. So we'll still socialize, just in a different way. We adapt.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Sarah.
Thanks for having me.
So everyone, once again, I'll post some information, and Sarah will be sharing some information that you can use and should be helpful to make things easier, not more complicated. Thanks for watching.
Bye.